The heavy bedroom door did not make a sound, but the air in the room suddenly felt freezing. Ashanti froze. She was wrapped in a thin white sheet, her hair messy and her heart racing. She turned her head slowly, her eyes wide with shock. Standing in the doorway was her husband, Yuji Satori. He was supposed to be gone for 3 more days. Yuji looked tall and dangerous in his dark suit. His face was like stone, and his hand gripped the door handle so hard his knuckles turned white. He was not looking at her face. His cold, dark eyes were fixed on the floor. There, resting on the expensive rug, was a single brown leather shoe. It was polished and clean, but it did not belong to Yuji. He only ever wore black. The silence in the penthouse was heavy. Ashanti's breath hitched as she tried to pull the sheet tighter around her body. She looked at the shoe, then back at the man who could change her life with a single word. She had a secret, and now it was lying right at his feet. Yuji stepped into the room, and the war began. Yuji Satori was a man who lived by a strict clock. When he said 3 days, he usually meant exactly 72 hours. He had left for the southern docks to handle a group of rebels who were stealing from his shipments. It was a messy job that was supposed to take time, but Yuji was faster and meaner than anyone else. He had finished the business in a single night of cold, hard talk and even colder actions. By the time the sun came up on the second day, the problem was gone. He could have stayed at a luxury hotel. He could have gone to his private club to celebrate. But for the first time in his life, he wanted to go home. He wanted to see Ashanti. He wouldn't call it love, because a man in his position wasn't allowed to have such soft feelings. To him, she was his. She was the one thing in the world that didn't smell like gunpowder or expensive cigars. As his black car pulled up to the private elevator, he didn't call ahead. He wanted to see the look of surprise on her face. He walked past his guards at the front door. They stood straight and looked terrified. They hadn't expected the boss back so soon. Usually, Yuji liked that fear. It meant they were alert. But today, the silence in the hallway felt strange. The penthouse was a fortress. It had thick glass that could stop a bullet and locks that required a fingerprint. It was the safest place in the city. Yet as Yuji walked down the long marble hall toward their bedroom, the house felt like a giant trap. There were no lights on in the kitchen. There was no music playing from Ashanti's phone. It was too quiet. He reached the bedroom door and paused. He expected to hear Ashanti breathing softly in her sleep, or perhaps the sound of a page turning in a book. Instead, he felt a strange shift in the air. He pushed the door open, and the world seemed to stop moving. Ashanti was on the edge of the bed, her skin glowing in the dim light. She looked like a beautiful statue made of fear. But Yuji's eyes didn't stay on her for long. They dropped to the floor. The brown leather shoe sat there like a loud scream in the middle of a library. It was a man's shoe. It was expensive, the kind of shoe a person wears when they want to look important. Yuji felt a hot flame of anger lick at his chest. He had spent 3 years making sure this house was a wall between Ashanti and the rest of the world. He had given her everything. And now, he was standing in his own home, looking at proof that someone had climbed over that wall. "I finished early," Yuji said. His voice was so low it was almost a whisper, but it filled the room like thunder. Ashanti didn't speak. She couldn't. She just sat there, clutching the white sheet to her chest. Her eyes were fixed on him, searching his face for a sign of what he would do next. The silence of the house wasn't peaceful anymore. It felt like the heavy quiet right before a bomb goes off. Every camera in the hall and every guard at the gate had failed him. Or perhaps he realized with a sinking feeling, he had been the one who failed to see what was happening right under his nose. The single brown shoe sat on the rug like a piece of evidence at a crime scene. Yuji did not look away from it. He stepped into the room, and the heavy thud of his own black boots on the floor sounded like a heartbeat. Every step he took made the room feel smaller. Ashanti squeezed the white sheet tighter, her knuckles turning as pale as the fabric. She wanted to look away, but she was trapped by his cold, dark stare. "I asked you a question, Ashanti," Yuji said. He stopped just inches away from the brown shoe. He didn't pick it up. He just looked down at it with a look of pure disgust. This is not my size. This is not my style. And I know for a fact that I did not leave it here. Ashanti's mind was spinning. Her throat felt dry and her heart was hammering against her ribs so hard it hurt. "Yuji, please," she whispered, or her voice shaking. It's not what you think. I can explain." "Then explain," Yuji replied. He crossed his arms over his chest. His expensive suit jacket strained against his broad shoulders. He looked like a hunter waiting for his prey to make a move. "Tell me why there is a man's shoe in our bedroom while I was away. Tell me who was standing exactly where I am standing right now." It was a delivery," Ashanti blurted out. The lie felt heavy and wrong as soon as it left her lips. "A stylist came by. I wanted to surprise you with something new for when you got back. He must have dropped it. He was in a rush." Yuji's eyes narrowed. He was a man who spent his life surrounded by liars and thieves. He could smell a lie from a mile away, and this one was bad. He took a slow step toward the bed. Ashanti flinched, now pulling her legs closer to her body. She looked small and vulnerable against the giant headboard of the bed. "A stylist?" Yuji asked, his voice sounding like sliding ice. "A stylist who leaves behind one shoe? A stylist who comes into my private bedroom while my wife is wrapped in nothing but a bedsheet?" He shook his head slowly. "Do not lie to me, Ashanti. You know what happens to people who lie to me." "I'm not lying," she cried out, but her eyes were darting toward the corner of the room, toward the large walk-in closet. She was terrified that Yuji would see the small movement of the curtain or hear a sound that shouldn't be there. Yuji didn't move toward the closet. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small silver remote. With a quick click, the heavy oak door to the bedroom slid shut. Then, there was a metallic clack. It was the sound of the electronic locks engaging. This room was now a vault. No one could get in, and more importantly, no one could get out. "Yuji, what are you doing?" Ashanti asked, her voice rising in fear. "I am making sure we are not interrupted," Yuji said. He sat down in a leather chair near the door, his eyes never leaving her face. He looked perfectly calm, which was much scarier than if he had been screaming. "You are going to sit there, and you are going to tell me the truth. We have all night. My men are outside, and they have orders to search every inch of this building. If there is a man in this house, they will find him. But I want to hear it from you first." Ashanti felt a cold chill run down her spine. She knew Yuji's men were thorough. They would find the person she was hiding, and when they did, Yuji would not ask any more questions. He would act. She looked at the single brown shoe on the floor and realized that her life depended on what she said in the next few minutes. The silence in the locked room was deafening, and Yuji was waiting. The radio on Yuji's shoulder made a sharp, buzzing sound. A deep voice came through the speaker, sounding clear and cold. "Sir, we have started the search. We are moving through the living area and the kitchen. No one has left the building since you arrived." Yuji did not pick up the radio. He didn't even take his eyes off Ashanti. He just sat in that leather chair like a king on a throne, watching her every move. "Check the vents," he said to the air. "Check the balcony. If a mouse is breathing in this penthouse, I want to know where it is." Ashanti felt like the walls were closing in on her. Outside the locked bedroom door, she could hear the heavy boots of Yuji's men. They were moving furniture. They were opening cabinets. Every loud bang made her jump. She knew how Yuji's men worked. They were like ghosts, quiet but deadly. They would find everything. She looked at the walk-in closet across from the bed. Behind the rows of expensive dresses and silk robes, there was a small wooden panel. It was a secret door that led to a tiny panic room. It was so well hidden that even the builders didn't know it was there. Inside that room, a man was holding his breath. He was the man who owned the brown shoe. He was the man who held a secret that could destroy Yuji's entire empire. Ashanti wasn't hiding a lover. She was hiding a whistleblower, someone who had worked for Yuji's father and knew about a plan to kill Yuji from the inside. But she couldn't tell Yuji that yet. If she told him now, while he was this angry, he might kill the man before hearing the truth. Or worse, he might think Ashanti was part of the plot. "You look like you're waiting for something," Yuji said. He stood up slowly and walked toward the window. The lights of the city twinkled far below, but the room felt like a dark cave. "Are you waiting for him to jump out and save you? Or are you waiting for my men to drag him out by his hair?" "There is no one else, Yuji," Ashanti said, her voice cracking. She tried to make her face look calm, but her hands were shaking under the sheet. "I told you it was just a mistake. Please tell your men to stop." "You're scaring me." Yuji turned around. The blue light from the city windows hit the side of his face, making him look even more like a statue. "I am scaring you?" he asked. He gave a short, dry laugh that had no joy in it. "You are my wife. You have lived in this house for 3 years. You know that I protect what is mine, but you also know what I do to people who break my trust." A loud crash came from the hallway. One of the guards had knocked over a tall glass vase. Ashanti let out a small gasp. Her eyes darted to the closet again. She prayed that the man inside was staying perfectly still. If he made a single sound, if he coughed or shifted his weight, it would be over. Yuji noticed her gaze. He began to walk toward the closet, his steps slow and purposeful. Each step felt like a hammer hitting a nail. He stopped right in front of the closet door and reached out his hand. Ashanti held her breath. Her heart was beating so fast she felt dizzy. She wanted to scream, to run, to do anything to stop him. But Yuji didn't open the door. He just rested his hand on the wood, feeling the vibration of the house. He stayed like that for a long minute. The silence in the bedroom was so thick it felt like they were underwater. "The shoe is high quality," Yuji said, still looking at the closet. "It is the kind of shoe a man wears when he wants to blend in with the rich. But the person who wears it is a coward. A real man would not hide in the dark while his woman suffers." "He isn't a coward," Ashanti whispered before she could stop herself. Yuji froze. He turned his head slowly to look at her, his eyes burning with a new kind of fire. "So, you admit there is a he?" Ashanti bit her lip, realizing her mistake. She had just given him the proof he wanted. The ghost in the penthouse was no longer a guess. To Yuji, the man was real, and he was close. The air in the locked bedroom felt like it was running out. Yuji was still standing by the closet, his shadow long and dark across the floor. Ashanti looked at him, and for a split second, the cold, angry man in front of her vanished. Her mind slipped away from the terror of the brown shoe and the hidden man. She remembered a time when this room didn't feel like a cage. 3 years ago, the silence in this penthouse had a different sound. It was their wedding night. Ashanti remembered sitting on the edge of the same bed, wearing a dress made of white silk that cost more than a house. She had been nervous then, too. But it was the kind of nervous that made her heart flutter with hope. That night, Yuji had walked into the room just as he had tonight. But his face wasn't made of stone back then. He had taken off his dark suit jacket and tossed it onto a chair. He didn't have a gun tucked into his belt. He had walked over to her, his movements slow and gentle. He had taken her hand in his, the same hand that now gripped the door handle with white knuckles, and he had kissed her palm. "You are safe now," he had whispered into the quiet of the night. "As long as you are with me, the world cannot touch you. My name will be your shield." Ashanti had believed him. She had looked into his dark eyes and seen a promise of a future where she would be loved and protected. She thought she was entering a fairy tale, even if her prince was a mafia boss. She thought they were building a life of light and warmth in the middle of a cold, dangerous world. That night, they had sat by the window and watched the city lights, talking about the places they would travel and the life they would share. The silence had felt like a soft blanket. But as the months turned into years, the shadows of Yuji's world began to creep into their home. The shield he promised started to feel more like a wall. The guards at the door weren't there just to keep enemies out. They were there to watch her every move. The safety he gave her turned into a life where she couldn't even go to the grocery store without 3 men in black suits following her. Now, sitting on the bed in her white sheet, the memory of that wedding night felt like a cruel joke. The man who had promised to protect her was now the man she was most afraid of. The light in his eyes had been replaced by a deadly suspicion. The house that was supposed to be a home was now a fortress filled with secrets and lies. Yuji turned away from the closet and looked at Ashanti. The moonlight hit his face, and for a moment, he looked like the man from 3 years ago. But then his gaze fell back to the single brown shoe on the rug, and the softness vanished. "I remember what I told you on our first night here," Yuji said, his voice cutting through her thoughts. It was as if he could read her mind. "I told you that my name would protect you. I told you that I would never let anything hurt you." He took a step closer to the bed. The weight of his presence made Ashanti feel like she was shrinking. "But I also told you that loyalty is the only thing that matters. Without loyalty, we are just 2 strangers living in a cold house." Ashanti looked at the wedding photo on the small table by the bed. In the picture, they were smiling. They looked like they had no secrets. Now the room was filled with them. The hope they had on their wedding night was gone, buried under the weight of the Mafia life and the terrifying truth that was hiding just a few feet away. Yuji sat back down in the leather chair. He did not yell. He did not throw things. Instead, he simply watched her. In the world of the Mafia, silence was the most powerful tool. It made people nervous. It made them talk just to fill the quiet. He waited for 3 full minutes, his eyes never blinking, until Ashanti began to fidget with the edge of her white sheet. "The shoe is a size 10, Yuji said suddenly. His voice was calm, like he was talking about the weather. "It is a very expensive brand. They only make 100 pairs of these every year. A simple stylist could not afford a shoe like this. A delivery man certainly could not." Ashanti opened her mouth to speak, but Yuji raised a hand to stop her. "When a woman is caught with another man, she usually looks at the floor," Yuji continued. He leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. "She feels shame, she cries. But you, Ashanti, you are not looking at the floor. You are looking at the closet, and you are not looking at it with love. You are looking at it like there is a bomb inside." Ashanti felt her heart skip a beat. She tried to look away, but it was too late. Yuji was too smart. He had spent years reading the faces of enemies who were trying to kill him. He knew exactly what fear looked like. "If there was a lover in that room," Yuji whispered, stepping closer to the bed, "he would have tried to run when my car pulled up. He would have heard the elevator, but the shoe is right there in the middle of the rug. It was dropped in a hurry, yes, but not because someone was jumping out of a window. It was dropped because someone was being pushed into hiding." "Yuji, I told you," Ashanti started, but her voice was weak. "You told me a lie," Yuji snapped. The calmness was starting to slip, replaced by a sharp, cold edge. "You are a terrible liar, Ashanti. That is one of the things I liked about you. You were always so honest. So, tell me, if it isn't a lover, what is it? Why are you protecting someone who clearly doesn't belong here?" Ashanti looked at the closet door. She thought about the man inside, a man named Mr. Sato who had worked for Yuji's father for 30 years. Mr. Sato had come to her in secret, trembling, with a folder full of names of Yuji's own guards who were planning to turn against him tonight. The brown shoe had fallen off when she scrambled to shove him into the panic room as Yuji's key turned in the lock. She looked at Yuji's face. He looked so hurt, even though he was trying to hide it behind his Mafia boss mask. He truly thought she had betrayed their marriage. The pain in his eyes was deep, and it made her want to tell him everything. But she knew the rules of his world. If she spoke too soon, the men outside, the ones who might be part of the plot, would hear through the door. "I can't tell you yet," Ashanti said, her voice finally turning steady. "But I promise you, Yuji, I have never been unfaithful to you. Not once, not even in my thoughts." Yuji stood up and walked to the closet. He reached out and picked up the brown shoe. He turned it over in his hand, looking at the polished leather. He looked at the bed, then back at the closet. He was a master of logic. A lover doesn't leave one shoe behind and stay to be caught. A lover doesn't hide in a room that is about to be searched by 20 armed men. He realized Ashanti wasn't acting like a guilty wife. She was acting like a soldier protecting a secret. His brow furrowed. If she wasn't cheating on him, then she was doing something much more dangerous. Well, she was playing his game. And in his game, people died every single day. "If I open this door," Yuji said, his hand on the closet handle, "and I find a man who is not a lover, what am I going to find, Ashanti? An enemy or a ghost?" Ashanti didn't answer. She just watched him, her breath held tight in her chest. Yuji realized that the lover story was a lie she had told to protect him, not herself. The realization hit him like a physical blow. He wasn't just a husband anymore, he was a target, and his wife was the only one standing in the way. Yuji's hand tightened on the handle of the closet door. He did not look back at Ashanti, but he could feel her eyes on him. The air in the room was so still that he could hear the faint hum of the city lights outside. He pulled the door open. Rows of silk dresses and expensive coats hung in the dark, smelling of Ashanti's sweet perfume. To anyone else, it looked like a normal closet. But Yuji knew every inch of his fortress. He stepped inside, pushing the clothes aside until he reached the back wall. "Yuji, stop!" Ashanti said, her voice stronger now. She stood up from the bed, still wrapped in the white sheet. She walked to the closet and stood right behind him. "If you open that panel, there is no going back. You have to promise to listen before you use your gun." Yuji didn't promise. He simply found the hidden latch and pressed it. A small section of the wood clicked and slid open, revealing a tiny, cramped space behind the wall. Inside, a man was curled into a ball, his face pale and covered in sweat. He was older, with gray hair and a suit that was wrinkled from hiding. He looked up at Yuji with eyes full of pure terror, and on his left foot, he was wearing a brown leather shoe. His right foot was covered only by a dark sock. Yuji reached in and dragged the man out into the light of the bedroom. The man stumbled and fell to his knees, gasping for air. Yuji stood over him, his face twisted in a mask of cold fury. He reached into his waistband for his weapon, but Ashanti stepped between them. "He is not an enemy, Yuji," she cried, placing her hands on his chest. "His name is Mr. Sato. He was your father's most trusted advisor before he joined the Tanaka family. He didn't come here to be with me. He came here because he had nowhere else to go." Yuji looked down at the man on the floor. He recognized him now. Mr. Sato had been a rival for years, working for the very people Yuji had been fighting. "A Tanaka spy in my bedroom," Yuji whispered, his voice vibrating with anger. "And my wife is hiding him." "I am not a spy." Mr. Sato shook as he spoke. He reached into his jacket with a trembling hand. Yuji leveled his gaze at him, ready to strike, but the man only pulled out a thick yellow folder. "I defected tonight. I saw the orders, Yuji. They aren't coming for your shipments anymore. They are coming for your life, and the call is coming from inside your own house." Yuji froze. He took the folder from the man's hand and opened it. Inside were photos of his own guards, men he had paid and trusted for years. There were maps of the penthouse, including the codes to the private elevator and the timing of the guard rotations. But the worst part was a signed document. It was an agreement to kill Yuji Satori tonight, unsigned by his own head of security. Yuji felt a cold, sharp pain in his chest that had nothing to do with a bullet. He looked at the single brown shoe on the rug, then at Ashanti. He realized that while he was away, she had been sitting in this room, holding the weight of his life in her hands. She hadn't been cheating. She had been negotiated with a defecting rival to save her husband from a trap he didn't even know existed. "The shoe fell off when I heard your car," Ashanti said softly, her eyes filling with tears. "I had to hide him before the guards saw us. I knew if I told you while you were angry, you wouldn't believe me. I was trying to save you, Yuji." Yuji dropped the folder onto the bed. He looked at Ashanti, and the stone mask on his face finally cracked. He felt a deep wave of guilt wash over him. He had spent the last hour treating her like a criminal, locking her in a room and accusing her of betrayal, while she was actually his only true ally. The silence in the room was no longer about a secret lover. It was about a deadly war that was starting right outside their door. Yuji looked at the photos in the yellow folder. He felt a cold knot tie itself in his stomach. These were men he had fed. These were men who had stood at his side during funerals and weddings. He looked at Ashanti, who was still standing there, her shoulders shaking under the white sheet. Her eyes were full of a deep sadness that he had put there. He wanted to reach out and pull her into his arms. He wanted to tell her he was sorry for every cold word he had said, but there was no time for apologies. "Mr. Sato," Yuji said, and his voice becoming sharp and professional. "How many of them are outside right now?" "At least 6 on this floor," the old man whispered, his teeth chattering. "And more are coming up the service lift. They know I am here. They saw my car parked near the building. They know I have the files." As if on cue, the lights in the bedroom flickered once, twice, and then died. The penthouse was plunged into a deep, heavy darkness. Only the pale blue glow from the city windows far away remained. Usually, the backup generator would kick in within 3 seconds, but tonight, the house stayed dark. The safe house was no longer safe. The traitors had cut the power from the basement. Suddenly, a loud metallic boom echoed through the long marble hallway. It was the sound of a heavy battering ram hitting the front door of the penthouse. The silent threat was over. The enemy was no longer hiding in the shadows. They were coming through the front gate with everything they had. "Get down, now!" Yuji yelled. He grabbed Ashanti by the waist and pulled her behind the heavy mahogany desk in the corner of the room. It was lined with steel to stop bullets. He shoved Mr. Sato down beside her, forcing the old man to stay low. Another boom followed, even louder this time. Then came the sound of expensive glass shattering into a million pieces. The alarms finally started to scream, a high-pitched wail that made Ashanti cover her ears. In the hallway, the sound of rapid footsteps was like a drumbeat. These weren't the steady, polite steps of guards. These were the frantic, heavy boots of men who were here to finish a job. "Yuji, what do we do?" Ashanti asked. Her voice was barely a whisper over the screeching alarm. Her eyes were wide, reflecting the tiny red lights of the security system. Yuji reached into a hidden drawer in the desk and pulled out 2 handguns. He checked the magazines with a practiced, steady hand. "We fight," he said. He looked at her, his eyes glowing like a cat's in the dark. "I am sorry, Ashanti. I was a fool. I should have trusted you from the second I walked in." "Don't worry about that now," she said, her voice shaking but determined. She reached out and squeezed his hand for just a second. "Just stay alive, please." A spray of bullets hit the bedroom door, leaving jagged holes in the thick wood. Splinters flew across the room like tiny arrows. The attackers weren't even trying to be quiet anymore. They knew Yuji was trapped. They knew Mr. Sato was inside with the evidence. The siege of the Satori estate had begun, and the walls that were meant to protect them now felt like they were closing in. Yuji moved to the side of the door, his back flat against the wall. He could hear the men shouting to each other in the hall. They were calling for more explosives. They were going to blow the door off its hinges in seconds. "Stay behind the desk," Yuji ordered, his voice echoing with the power of a commander. "No matter what happens, no matter what you hear, do not move until I tell you." He took a deep breath, filling his lungs with the smell of smoke and dust. He was the boss of the Satori syndicate. He had fought his way to the top of the mountain, and he wasn't going to let a few traitors take his life in his own bedroom. The air in the room grew hot. The silent game was dead. Now there was only the roar of the alarm, the flash of gunfire, and the desperate fight to survive a night that had started with a single brown shoe. The bedroom door exploded inward with a deafening bang. Wood splinters flew through the air like tiny, jagged glass. Yuji didn't flinch. He leaned around the corner of the wall and fired his weapon with a steady hand. The hallway was filled with smoke and the orange flashes of gunfire. Ashanti crouched lower behind the steel-lined desk, her fingers digging into the heavy wood. Beside her, Mr. Sato was shaking so hard his teeth clicked together. A group of men in black tactical gear rushed through the smoke. These were Yuji's own men, but they were no longer wearing the Satori family badge. They were the traitors from the folder. Yuji fired again, his face a mask of cold concentration. But there were too many of them. He had to duck back behind the wall as a hail of bullets tore into the expensive wallpaper. "Yuji, to your left!" Ashanti screamed. She had seen a movement in the shadows near the walk-in closet. One of the attackers had climbed through a side vent and was aiming a silent weapon at Yuji's head. Without thinking, Ashanti grabbed a heavy glass award from the top of the desk and hurled it with all her strength. The glass hit the man's arm just as he fired, sending the shot wide. Yuji spun around and neutralized the threat in a second. He looked over at Ashanti. Her white sheet was covered in gray dust and black smoke. Her hair was messy and her eyes were wide with fear, but she wasn't hiding anymore. She was watching the room, her mind working fast. She looked like a soldier. "Under the bed!" Ashanti yelled over the noise of the alarm. "The second compartment," Yuji remembered. He had hidden a small submachine gun there months ago, but in the heat of the moment, his mind had focused only on the weapons in his hand. He dove across the floor, sliding on the Persian rug and grabbed the heavy weapon. As he stood up, he felt a stinging pain in his shoulder. A bullet had grazed him, staining his charcoal suit jacket with dark blood. Ashanti saw the blood and let out a small gasp, but she didn't stop moving. She grabbed Mr. Sato by his collar and pulled him toward the back of the desk. "Stay down," she ordered the old man. Then she looked at Yuji. In that moment, Yuji finally saw it. He saw the truth behind the betrayal. For hours, Ashanti had been alone in this house with a man she was supposed to hate. She had risked Yuji coming home and killing her on the spot. She had endured his cold stares, his locked doors, and his terrifying accusations. And she had done it all while knowing that a team of killers was waiting in the hallway. She hadn't been hiding a lover. She had been standing guard over a secret that was keeping Yuji alive. It was an act of extreme, lonely bravery. She had faced the most dangerous man in the city, her own husband, to save his life. "I've got the right side," Ashanti shouted, grabbing a smaller spare pistol Yuji had dropped near the desk. She held it with two hands, her arms shaking but her aim steady. She wasn't an expert, but she was willing to die to keep the door clear. Yuji felt a rush of pride and shame hit him at the same time. He had called her weak. He had called her a traitor. But here she was, wrapped in silk and surrounded by blood, fighting by his side. She was the strongest person in the room. "Stay behind me, Ashanti," Yuji roared. He stepped into the center of the room, his new weapon spitting fire into the hallway. "We're moving to the elevator, now!" He reached back and grabbed Ashanti's hand. Her skin was hot and sweaty, but she gripped his hand back with a strength that surprised him. Together, they moved through the smoke. The silk of her sheet trailed behind her like a battle flag, stained with the dust of their crumbling home. Yuji realized that he didn't just have a wife, he had a partner. Their lives had finally tangled together, and he would never doubt her again. The sound of gunfire finally stopped, replaced by a heavy, ringing silence. A smoke from the weapons floated through the air like gray ghosts. The bedroom was a mess of broken wood, shattered glass, and torn silk. Outside in the hallway, the sound of heavy boots returned, but these were different. These were the steady, organized steps of Yuji's loyal elite guards, led by his most trusted captain. They had finally arrived to clean up the mess and secure the building. Yuji slowly lowered his weapon. His chest was heaving and his charcoal suit was torn and stained with blood. He turned to look behind the steel desk. Ashanti was still there, her hands tightly gripping the small pistol. Her face was smudged with soot, and the white sheet she wore was gray with dust. Next to her, Mr. Sato sat on the floor, still wearing his one brown shoe, looking like he had seen a nightmare come to life. "It's over," Yuji said, but his voice rough and tired. He reached out his hand, and this time Ashanti took it without hesitation. He pulled her up from the floor, and for a long moment they just stood there in the middle of the ruined room. Yuji looked down at Mr. Sato. The third man whose shoe had started this whole disaster was no longer a threat or a mystery. He was just an old man who had risked everything to do the right thing. Yuji nodded to his guards. "Take Mr. Sato to a safe house. Guard him with your lives. He is under my personal protection now." The guards led the old man away. As he walked past, Mr. Sato paused to pick up his other brown shoe from the rug. He looked at Ashanti with a small, thankful nod before disappearing into the hallway. The ghost in the penthouse was finally gone, but the shadows he had revealed stayed behind. Yuji turned back to Ashanti. He looked at the room around them. The expensive paintings were ruined. The beautiful furniture was smashed. The locks he had trusted had been broken. He realized that his fortress was nothing but a pile of stones and glass. It couldn't truly protect anyone. "I spent so much time looking for an enemy," Yuji whispered, stepping closer to her. He reached out a trembling hand and brushed a stray hair away from her eyes. "I thought the most dangerous thing in my world was a rival gang or a hidden lover. I thought the worst thing that could happen was being betrayed by the woman I loved." He paused, his dark eyes searching hers. "But standing in that smoke, watching you fight to save me, I realized I was wrong. The most dangerous thing in my world isn't a person with a gun. It's the thought of living a single day without you. It's the idea of this house being empty of your voice and your light." Ashanti let out a shaky breath. The fear was starting to leave her body, replaced by a deep, warm relief. She looked at the man she had married. He wasn't the cold, perfect boss anymore. He was just Yuji, the man who was finally learning how to trust. "I didn't do it for the syndicate, Yuji," she said softly. "I didn't do it because I'm a soldier. I did it because you are my husband. I made a promise to you 3 years ago, and I intend to keep it." Yuji took her other hand. He didn't kiss her palm this time. Instead, he held both of her hands against his heart. He could feel it beating fast against his ribs, a steady rhythm of life. "The old rules are gone," Yuji said, his voice firm and clear. "I promised to be your shield, but I was wrong to make you stay behind it. From now on, there are no more locked doors between us, no more secrets, no more safe houses that feel like prisons. If we are going to live in this world, we do it as equals." He leaned down and pressed his forehead against hers. The smell of smoke was still there, but beneath it, he could smell her perfume. "That is my new vow to you, Ashanti. Not just to protect you, but to trust you. With my life, with my secrets, with everything." Ashanti smiled through her tears. She leaned into him, feeling the strength of his arms around her. As the sun began to rise over the city of Seoul, the light hit the broken windows of the penthouse. The dust was settling, and for the first time in 3 years, the silence in the room didn't feel like a trap. It felt like a fresh start. The war had been won, not with bullets, but with the simple, powerful truth of a love that refused to break.